Well, good morning, everybody. I'm John Casper, the Oshkosh Chamber, and thanks for joining us for our first in a three-part series on federal legislative briefings with our members of our local congressional delegation. Today we have Congressman Glenn Grothman joining us. He's live from I think Fond du Lac office today, right?
Correct.
Perfect. So what we plan on doing is having the congressman talk about the latest of activities and things going on in Washington. A lot of moving parts these days in Washington, and then we will follow that up with questions from those that are listening in. As a reminder, we are recording this, and anybody who can view it at a later date will be you can do so. It'll be archived on our website, and then we'll be pushing out to members. If anybody has a question and would like to ask that question, please use the Q&A tab on the bottom of the screen, and we will be monitoring those, and we'll ask those questions of the congressman when we're done. So, Congressman Grothman, thank you again for joining us, and why don't we just throw it over to you, and you can do a quick update for us.
Sure. All sorts of things going on in Washington. We knew if the election turned out the way it did, there was going to be a lot of activity in the House, and there's a lot of activity in the House. It's timely that I be talking to you guys because I spent the last half hour on a roundtable with the Education and Labor Committee. It's one of three committees I'm on. I'm also on Budget and Government Oversight, talking about the PRO Act. I don't think the PRO Act has been sufficiently explained to the public. It's one of many horrible things that could happen this session. The PRO Act greatly will increase unionization in this country in a way that I don't think any fair-minded person would think. It could be on the floor as early as next week. The PRO Act, first of all, allows for surprise unionized elections. In up to 20 days, it could be less than that. If you have somebody trying to get a union in your business, and it could be any business, could be a restaurant or whatever, you would be required to turn over the email address, your landline, cell phones, and home address to all of your employees, to any union who would want to unionize. Once they have that information, they can give it to anybody else, sell it to anybody else. The union will determine how the election takes place. I know in the bill last year, it could be things like by mail, or it could be a way that you would lose the privacy of the ballot to determine whether or not you're union. All what I've told you already is scary enough. It would play dramatically with independent contractors. I think that'll affect a great many businesses who rely on independent contractors. It will certainly change relationships of any insurance agents on the line. If your business model with your company is that you are an independent contractor, I think the bill as now drawn out would go by the board. So it's just one example of the type of bills we've been dealing with up here. This week, we voted on a bill with regard to election reform. The bill would mandate more elections by mail, and would allow what they call vote harvesting. That's what they have in California, where it's public knowledge who's getting a write-in ballot. You can have people show up at your house. Hello, John Smith. I see you haven't voted yet. I'm here to collect your ballot, or if you want to, you can turn in your ballot to me. And of course, there's nothing prohibiting that person from even coaching somebody how to vote. The danger there is, of course, in every election, many people don't vote, or are very apathetic. And once you can have vote harvesting, you can kind of coach apathetic people on how they're going to vote. So I would think that if that would ever become law, it'd be a complete disaster. There were other amendments that we were able to beat back that are not in the bill, but to give you an idea, and I'm working with individual Democrats. We'll talk about that in the near future. I get along with Democrats on a personal level, but next up, 125 of the, I believe, 223, so over half the Democrats the other day voted for 16-year-old voting age. I don't know that was adequately publicized. It was over 80 Democrats voted to have all prisoners be able to vote. So obviously, we're trying to get people who are less invested in the system, maybe people less involved as to what's going on, to vote to tip the scale further. I mean, the idea that over half the Democrats I work with were for 16-year-old voting age is a scary thing. But the bill itself, like I said, is scary. The idea that I can go out and ring the doorbell of people who have requested an absentee ballot and ask whether they voted or can I help return the ballot would be quite scary. And that's another example of a bill we voted on. Other things that have been going on have been executive orders from President Biden. We're familiar in this area because it affects Michael's pipeline, but the Keystone pipeline, the fact that construction is ended is, of course, immediate economic impact. They talk about up to 11,000 workers, many working in the 70 to over $100,000 range. In the long run, it will probably drive up the cost of oil. In the long run, it will probably make people benefit China. So that's something else that's gone on here that bothers me a great deal. Next week, we're going to have a bill on guns. We had another bill, by the way, the same bill that passed last session with regard to policing, making it much easier to sue police if it ever becomes law. And we'll talk about the chances of becoming law in a few seconds. But if it ever becomes law, I think it will result in very passive police, afraid to touch people, afraid to arrest people. That the Republicans is something that bothers me, keep emphasizing defund the police. And, individual cities will do that. That's obviously a foolish decision, particularly when you have a city with high crime. But I think the greater danger is that regardless of how many police you have, if the bill would become law, the police will be afraid to arrest people, afraid to handcuff people, and that'll be a big danger as well. Next thing I'll talk about, it's been knocked out right now in the Senate, but we're talking about an increase in minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think underpublicized is in that bill, and the Democrats know very well it's in there. There is a provision to get rid of what they call the sub-minimum wage. It's just it is a small segment of the population, but it's a very vulnerable segment of the population. In Winnebago County, it's Lakeside Packaging, would be Brook Industries, and in Fond du Lac County. But that is where people who have different abilities in our society, maybe spina bifida, that sort of thing, where they work. Right now, they lead productive lives, but frequently have to be paid under minimum wage to make things work for those industries. In the minimum wage bill, they are getting rid of what they call the sub-minimum wage. That would end that business model. Okay, it would be the end of people being able to work for $4 an hour, $6 an hour, what have you, at somewhere like Lakeside Packaging, which would be just so tragic to people there. Not only because they lose their jobs, they lose their independence. People like that do not need $20 an hour because the government subsidizes their lifestyle otherwise, but they lose their independence, they lose their self-worth. And I think for people like that, so much of their socializing happens at the business. And, everybody to a certain extent socializes at work. But for folks like that, it would be a real disaster because that is their opportunity to meet people outside their immediate family. And that would come to an end as well. I have a feeling what would happen is some people would find jobs for 5 or 6 hours a week in the community, which is fine, but that's different than 35 hours a week. Some people would have to go to what they call day services, which is kind of like babysitting, but that's a different thing than living the worthwhile, productive lives that they do now. So something else that I've been fighting, trying to educate the Democrats on. Also got off the phone this morning with someone whose son was in the military. There was a lot of emphasis on that America's racism out there. It is infecting the military, and it bothers me a great deal. In President Biden's inaugural address, he mentioned racism or white supremacy 5 times, which I was disappointed in. I mean, when I get around this community, Oshkosh or otherwise, I run into people from all over the world who are working hard and making it here in America. I can think of Laos, Philippines, Vietnam, Korea, India, Pakistan, Tunisia, Eritrea, Peru. I mean, people from all around the world. It's almost comical to say that the major problem in America is we have this huge white racism problem or white supremacy problem. But that is clearly what President Biden thinks. He came up with an executive order that was under publicized that I think will greatly increase race consciousness in the federal workforce. And insofar as the federal agencies can impose more rules on business, I think they're expected to do that. I think that is a way to really harm America and try to create racial tension where you begin to view people solely as where were your great great grandparents born. But you're going to have a lot of that under the Biden presidency. I'd be interested in hearing from your group whether you think racism is a big problem, as President Biden seems to think it is. And like I said, it's going to be a bigger problem in the military. I'm going to talk to somebody either later today or tomorrow on what's going on. But it seems like there's almost an assumption in the military that we have a lot of white supremacists there, and we have to root that out, and we have to see what people are saying or what bumper stickers they have on, and mainstream things are going to become hostile in the military, and I assume in other government agencies as well. So that's another scary thing. I'm sure other things are going to pop into my head as we go on here. As far as things that I'm working on that are more bipartisan in nature, I am again publicizing vitamin D. I don't know if you guys saw, but they got together, I believe over 200 people put together by a professor at Stanford talking about, I think it was 200. I think they started at 120. It's gone up. The benefits of vitamin D. It frustrates me a great deal that the CDC has not touted it. In kind of an interview with a more of a Hollywood celebrity sorts, Dr. Fauci let it slip that he is getting 6,000 units a day of vitamin D, which is, I think it's about 8 times, way over the recommended daily dose. I have talked to a professor at the University of Chicago who feels that if everybody had an adequate amount of vitamin D, you would have cut the number of fatalities could have been cut by 50%. So it's something that ought to be publicized and hasn't been publicized enough. We also are working with a drug fenofibrate, which is another drug like hydroxychloroquine, which if given immediately should reduce the number of people who pass away. If there's anybody from the medical community on the line, one of the things that frustrates me is that right now they wait until you get a test back to make sure somebody has the virus before they treat people, or other people are just sent home and see if they get well. A lot of these treatments are supposed to be given when you first find you have symptoms, and I would think that if they were given the treatments right away, rather than waiting 4 or 5 days for a test, as happens at least in the eastern part of my district, or was happening, I think a lot of people would have been saved there as well. So we're active on that. I'm working with a congressman from California who I'm glad is willing to help me publicize it. It has also not been publicized enough that people with darker skin are more likely to get the virus. He's aware of it. I don't think those communities have been as vocal as they should be, but I'm glad he's going to be helping me out with that. Other things that I'm working on, we got in a bill, the ability for the Ice Age Trail, I guess it doesn't go through Winnebago County, but to be part of the national park system, which will open up more federal funding for them, which right now is going to other things. I'm working on biosimilars as substitutes for insulin. Right now, a lot of people are paying $500 to $1,000. Some people not much, but depending upon the quality of your insurance, you could be paying over $500. I've heard people up to $1,000 for insulin a month. Obviously, a huge cost. If we get biosimilars in there, that's the equivalent of generics for insulin and could result in a significant cost savings. The drug companies will fight it. It is very frustrating the degree in which money plays a role in Washington, but it does. But it would be nice if we could get that in there. I'm also fighting for a gentleman from the Oshkosh area to get a little more recognition for people flew in Air America, which was the CIA airline during the Vietnam War. Documents have been released now clarifying that these were U.S. government employees, and we like to think they'll get the recognition that they should. So there's a little bit as far as what's going on, and I'm sure other things will pop into my mind if you guys don't ask me questions right away.
Great. Yeah, if anybody has a question, please use the Q&A tab. I can start off with a lot of things. The COVID stimulus package that was passed out of the House has a lot of spending unrelated to COVID.
Right.
Specifically some of the things that kind of jump out to me is the $350 billion that are going to bail out states, communities, and others. And I looked at a link the other day, and if I read this right, Winnebago County is going to get $33 million of stimulus money, and the city of Oshkosh is going to get $21 million, which I guess is great, but that's our money.
I'd like to comment on that. I'm glad you brought it up. I have been contacted by another mayor of a city that's not quite as big as Oshkosh, but it's a sizable city. He, prior to seeing the bill, felt he could be made whole with $1.2 million. He's getting over $20 million. Okay. There was another county that I am aware of. The county executive called me. He did not know exactly what he was out. He thought it might be under $1 million, maybe a little over $1 million, a little under $1 million. He's a conservative guy, so he didn't want any money. He was willing to tough it through. He's getting $20 million. I have tried to bring this up with the Democrats and said, are you actually going back and talking to the leaders of your municipalities as to how much money they really need or how much money they were out because of the COVID? I don't know how you put together a bill like this and wind up giving people, 5, 7, 10 times what they think they lost, other than just complete recklessness or not checking into what people want at home. And it gives you an idea how this bill was put together. So you understand, you would think at a time when Congress is so close to 50-50. I mean, in the Senate, it's 50-50 right on the button. In the House, there are a couple of vacant seats because we've had a couple of people pass away. But I think it's going to wind up 213 to 222, so pretty close. You would think they would talk to the Republicans. Unless I talk to them on the floor, they are not interested in amendments. The Democrats put together this bill on their own. It's scary. And not only because they're throwing money, I think far and away more money than anybody wanted some things. By the way, they still have the provision in there that the checks to individuals can go to illegal immigrants. So that gives you an idea how reckless things are going. Things going to, as you pointed out, unrelated to the COVID, unless you'd say things like National Endowment for the Arts is COVID related, but money going all sorts of different places. And I also think because of this, well, like I said, they put it through without any really wondering about whether things are going to the COVID. But I am very afraid of inflation kicking in. If you want to look at something that's not the most exciting thing, you could pull up the tables of M1 or M2, the money supply, and we are already, before this bill passes, out in unprecedented territory. To put another 1.9 trillion, really to have the Federal Reserve print another 1.9 trillion is just inviting disaster. We know that some of President Biden's own advisors have questioned the wisdom here. We already see, and of course it's for reasons other than just the COVID, other than the increase in the monetary supply. But we've already seen a substantial increase in the cost of housing. And, the stock market until recently has continued to go up. And I think that's because the Fed keeps printing money. And we've been down this road in the 1970s. I think we're returning there. I think it would be a complete disaster. And I think the actions of government, I even spoke out against some of the spending under President Trump, but to go another 1.9 trillion is just reckless and something you would expect, quite frankly, from a banana republic. The idea that we can become wealthier just by printing money and printing money. Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, I talked to him months ago when he pushed this, I thought, overspending under President Trump. And he said, well, you're never going to have an inflation during a downturn. Well, and he said, if we have inflation, we know what to do. Well, I know what we did when we had inflation in the 1970s. We had to kind of put the economy in a downturn in the beginning of the 80s to get the inflation out of the system. That's not very pleasant. And I don't know whether right now Congress or the American public would be willing to go through a downturn if inflation comes back a great deal. So the level of spending is in this bill is reckless. I'll put it that way. So I'm glad you brought it up. And I know Senator Johnson is fighting it in the Senate. And over there, you need all 50 Democrats on board. Nobody can break ranks to get this thing through. And I noticed that they're dialing back a little bit on the number of people who are getting their payments. And part of it is, you could say we're giving it to people who don't need it, which is true. But I think part of it is, I hope some of the wiser heads in the Biden administration, if there are any, are weighing in and saying, hey, we're already seeing inflation, and to print another $1.9 trillion is just crazy.
I think I read earlier today, at the rate we're going, by 2050, the level of debt in this country will be 202% of the national GDP. I can't even fathom that.
And it's not just the size of the debt. It's the point as if interest rates have to go up, already we're around $1 trillion a year debt with these interest rates at historic lows. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I think it puts the value of the American dollar at risk. Some people say other countries are being irresponsible too, so it won't hurt us. I've heard that argument. But, throughout my whole lifetime, the dollar has been the world's reserve currency. And one of the reasons for that is the United States is considered to be the adult in the room. We don't make I shouldn't make fun of individual countries, but, we don't make the currencies of banana republics. You can't pay for things here as you can pay for things with dollars abroad. And the reason is, we don't trust those currencies to be valuable a year from now. We don't know what their central bank is going to do. But we are behaving in this bill like just crazy people. And I'll point out, there are people who unquestionably need help, particularly in the hospitality industry. But when I get around, a lot of businesses are doing very well, and they don't talk about that. A little while ago, I was in a social setting with 3 people who were all middle-level management in manufacturers. They all had record years last year. So that's going on out there as well. In this bill, they're setting the unemployment bonus at $400 ahead of the original about $350 you get in Wisconsin. So, that again, an additional $400, well, $750 a week. I think you're looking at like $38,000 a year not to work. What effect is that going to have on the economy? Obviously, a lot of government spending. And I continue to hear, and I assume I'll hear it from some of you folks later in the hour, I continue to hear that they have a hard time getting people to work, which is kind of unusual when Congress is running around talking about the Great Recession we have. Usually, great recessions are not associated with, we can't find anybody to work. But that's what this recession is like. They're also not usually associated with an increased cost in housing going up. And right now, when I talk to builders, I haven't actually talked to the guys in Oshkosh, but other places around the district, the only thing that's preventing them from building more houses is they can't find people to work.
We're hearing more and more of that. I get calls every week from employers looking for people. I think there's still the unemployment rate is going is going down and it's getting tighter, but I still think there's a lot of people sitting on the sideline that is kind of waiting and seeing. This new stimulus is certainly going to be an encouragement for others to stay on the sideline. In some cases, as you mentioned, they can have a decent living collecting unemployment, which is concerning, especially at a time when we're the economy is recovering, is crawling back from where we were. So,
not to mention, you are continuing to destroy the moral fabric of America when people voluntarily, decide to sit on the sideline. That becomes the new norm, and that's a problem too.
Another COVID stimulus follow-up question is: some weeks back, I read that buried in that bill is expansion of Obamacare. In that they're going to increase the threshold, and apparently somebody can receive a subsidy for Obamacare up to.
There are subsidies in a variety of health things. You are right. And I think you led off the discussion with the bill. You were right to point out there are a lot of things in this bill that are not COVID related. Actually, they're using COVID as an excuse to get a lot more money in government hands or escalate programs. And I think their goal in escalating programs is when the crisis is over, maybe Congress will just feel obligated to keep the money coming. Now, that leaves open what they're going to do with the spiraling debt. I mean, obviously here they're cutting back in some areas like Medicare, but they're cutting back because they're assuming that ultimately the Republicans, and they probably will, are not going to want to cut Medicare, so that they will get more money there in the future. But I think they are looking to create a different sort of society that is more dependent on government than ever before, which is unfortunate. I will point out, I think in part because of, I don't know why. I don't know why. When the Democrats debated this on the floor, and I think it's because of the additional checks coming out, they kept saying that polls show that 70+% of the American public is for this, which is kind of scary because it means 70% of the American public thinks the way to prosperity is to have the government either go into debt, or another way of saying that, just have the Federal Reserve print and give them another $1,400 or $2,000, or for a family, $8,000. I think it's scary the American public feels that way. I do believe they feel that way. Apparently, if you put a ballot out there nationwide and said, should the government write you a check for $2,000 or for everybody $2,000, apparently that would be a popular government program. But it's scary that right now that is popular with the American public. I don't think it is going to be as popular 6 months from now when we see the inflation. I don't think it's going to be as popular when we look into where all this money is going. But right now, that is, to give you the other side, I think that the big talking point for the Democrats was 70% of the American public likes this bill. And I guess that means they're just looking at, I'm going to get a check and that's cool.
Well, it seems there's always a perpetual COVID crisis, and
I will point out, I'm sorry to keep cutting you off, but when things pop in my head, you're right. The COVID is going down. That occurs to me as well. And both here in Wisconsin and nationwide. And by the time they get these checks out or increased funding for a variety of programs, it will be down even further. Here in Wisconsin, our hospitalizations are something like a fifth of what they were on November 1st. So we still have a problem out there. There's no question about it, depending on the day. or the 7-day rolling average is still over 1,000 deaths a day. And I think in my own mind, I can count 5 people I know who've died of the COVID in various degrees of problems already, but certainly tragic and certainly things we weren't expecting. So it's something we have to address. But I will point out, as far as the effect on the economy, the number of people with COVID, it seems to me we're in a lot better shape than we were, I guess, 4 months ago.
Yeah. We are trending in the right direction. It'd be nice to see more local leadership in terms of people recognizing that, celebrating that, and start thinking about forward and how we're going to need to behave and started getting this economy recovering and back on track. A question that did come in from one of our listeners is you mentioned gun control, and they asked if you could elaborate a bit on that.
Well, there are a variety of bills. I don't know exactly what the bills we're voting on next week. There have been a variety of bills that have been introduced by a variety of Democrats. More registration, more restrictions on when you buy a gun immediately, and it's something to bring up because for whatever reason the NRA was not as active in the last election as they have been in the past. But it's again something that I anticipate. We haven't seen the details yet, but I anticipate voting on next week. I want to explain to you the importance of what's going on in the Senate. Some of you, which affects the gun control. Some of you remember that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it was very disappointing how little the Republicans got done when they had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. That is because, with one exception a year, you cannot pass bills out of the Senate unless they have 60 votes to break a filibuster, which means really every significant bill has to be bipartisan. And as long as the rule stays in effect, and that 60 rule used to be even a higher threshold, that's been around for well over 100 years. When the Republicans were in charge, there were some people, including me, who wondered if that was a wise thing because we wanted to get a lot done. And the Democrats really, Chuck Schumer had veto power on all but one bill a year at that time. Right now, bills like the gun control bills, like the PRO Act, are not going to pass the Senate without 60 votes. There are, when the Republicans were in charge, I think there was a time in which every single Republican senator said, for the long term, for the good of the country, we do not want to have a bill, or we don't want to break the filibuster rule. We're satisfied that we don't do things without 60 votes around here. And that basically includes policy, which would be things like the gun control bills. Right now, there are only 2 Democrats who are overtly in favor of the 60 rule. Kristen Sinema of Arizona, who I used to work with in the House, and Manchin from West Virginia. So I think day after day, or at least week after week, they sit in meetings of 50 Democrat senators, and they're the 2 holding out, and the other 48 are saying, look at all these wonderful things we get done if you guys would just let us pass these bills without invoking the filibuster rule. So many things, on the elections bill, on the guns bill, on immigration. We should talk about immigration as well. The only thing that is preventing truly horrible things that I think would ruin America, are 2 senators over there who, after all, are Democrats, who are telling the other Democrats we're going to stick with historical precedent. And scary thing. On the border, I want to mention that as well. I was down on the border in January. I may go down again with the Oversight Committee. There's already an increase in people crossing the border. When I've been down talking to the Border Patrol in the past, one thing that influences that is the statements of the president. If you have a President Trump talking about being tough on the border, and he wasn't as tough his first 2 years as he should have been, but when he talks that way, it affects what people are thinking in Central America and South America, wherever. When you have a president promoting immigration, including illegal immigrants in the stimulus package, it sends a message around the world that the United States is not enforcing its immigration laws. People who convey that message, by the way, are the drug cartels. They make money when people cross the border. People do not cross the border in these open areas without the drug cartels allowing it. It's $3,000 for a Mexican, $5,000 for a Central American, 8 to 10,000 for a Brazilian, could be as much as $20,000 for an Asian to cross the border. So obviously, it's in the cartel's interest to get more people to cross the border, and they publicize this sort of thing. And so we are seeing more people crossing the border. It's helpful that we built some of the wall, but nowhere near as much as we should. I saw that wall that's been built. It's about 30 feet high, wire on top of it. It goes 8 feet under the ground. The Border Patrol, to give you an idea, in addition to preventing people from coming here, the old wall, which could be as little as just some barbed wire, took at least 2 to 3 Border Patrol agents to patrol it per mile. The wall with the new 30-foot wall takes about 1 agent for every 2 miles. So the number of agents it takes to adequately guard the wall is a factor of, like a quarter of the number of agents. Now, they never have enough agents, but that gives you another area in which the wall really saves you money. By the way, and something else, neither here nor there, I toured the Tucson sector again. Last year was an unusually hot year in Mexico, hot year at the border. Last year, and 3 different people told them, they're making it up. In the Tucson sector alone, they found 100 bodies of people who dehydrated to death on the American side, who apparently were escorted there by the cartels and then couldn't find their way to civilization, and they died. I know Americans put out gallons of water for these people, hoping they'll find them. Hopefully they won't starve to death. But it was a bad year last year, unusually hot. 100 people died. So as far as people who keep encouraging people to come here, sending the message that illegals should come here, I think they should be conscious of the number of people who die as well trying to get here.
A number of years ago, the Republicans did away with earmarks and pork spending. Now it appears that that's going to be coming back again and might be alive and well.
They talk about it. We got rid of earmarks. So some of the earmarks obviously were for preposterous things. We got rid of them in part because earmarks cost money, and what they resulted in is people would vote for overall bad bills so they could get a $500,000 project in their district, and puts every congressman on the spot. Am I going to be Mr. Principal and say I'm not going to vote for it? I don't care if actually I've already been contacted by the tech school to the south of you guys. They want an earmark to get a new building in West Bend, which isn't even in my district, so we're not going to go for that. But already governmental entities are lining up. I think if we do go the earmark route, I think it'll be relatively small. I mean, they're going to ask you to vote for multi-trillion-dollar bills to get a $1 million project in your district. But they talk about bringing it back, and I don't like it because it's used to bribe congressmen to vote for bills that otherwise are bad. Now, you want to get your share for your district as well, and we'll see what the details are. But it's a shift, When the Republicans were in charge, they got rid of the earmarks. They got rid of what I thought was kind of a smelly practice. Now that we have the Democrats in charge, they're going back to the old days in which we bribe people to vote for projects. And quite frankly, some of those projects sometimes kind of foolish, which is why they got rid of them in the past. And like I said, overall, it surprises me how small some of those earmarks are. Now, eventually, am I going to vote for a bill, or am I going to try to get an earmark in for my district? I don't know how we're going to have to do it yet. It depends upon what it is and how the system plays out. But elections have consequences, and I think most people didn't like earmarks in the country, but the Republicans lost the majority 2 elections ago, and it looks like earmarks are back.
Yeah, it's bad policy all around. Question came in, Lakeland Care recently told long-term care facilities and nursing homes that they'll see their reimbursement rates cut by 9%. Was Medicare or Medicaid funding to them reduced? These facilities already lose money caring for Medicaid funded residents. Is there a plan being discussed to manage this?
I don't know if this is what they're talking about. There are cuts in this bill, and I'm not sure what they're talking about. The deal is this: if you want to get around the filibuster rule, you have to have a bill that is budget neutral. In other words, that for spending increases, there are corresponding spending cuts. As I understand it, the Democrats in Congress are going to cut some Medicaid or Medicare spending. They do that fully expecting that after they get their bill through without the filibuster, that the Republicans will be forced to increase the spending back up. And assuming that's what they're talking about, and I don't know if it is, I can check my staff, they should call my office. But assuming that's what they're talking about, I think they are saying, okay, to get this bill out on 50% with 51 votes, we're going to have to cut some Medicare, but eventually we're going to restore it because the Republicans aren't going to let those cuts stand. And that is probably an accurate assumption, but I would ask them to call my office to see whether that is what's going on in their case.
You mentioned the border wall. We seem to have a lot of walls up in Washington these days with.
I'm glad you brought that up too. It's embarrassing. I think any normal person by 9 o'clock on January 6th would have felt that they were safe in Washington. Okay. I don't know how many people participated in trying to damage things. It seems odd that 2 months after it happened, we still don't have that number. Obviously, a lot of people in the Capitol were just milling around, or at least that's what the Capitol Police have told me. But obviously, there was damage done. Obviously, horrible things happened that day. And it was I'm glad they're looking into it, finding exactly who was behind it. That's good. And I really hope that people who showed up that day looking to cause trouble, looking to cause violence are prosecuted. But by 9, 10 o'clock at night on the 6th, everything was fine. And it's a little ridiculous that we have this huge number of National Guard who showed up. They've reduced the number, but there's still guys, in their combat uniforms wandering around protecting the Capitol. We have fences right around the Capitol and another fence a couple blocks out from the Capitol, making it very difficult to get around. And it looks horrible. It looks like we're some sort of communist country here and we're under siege. And either the people who make this decision, which I think is largely Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, either they are making a show like Donald Trump left the country in a dangerous mess, or they really are paranoid. Because I don't know any congressman that I hang around with who thinks there's any threat of anything. It's expensive, but I think the psychological impact of having our Capitol surrounded by all this fencing is with wire on top of it, it's just preposterous and very irritating. Doesn't affect most of the public. I'm out there every week, and I just think it's an embarrassment. And it says something about the mindset of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi that they would want the Capitol surrounded by all this. I mean, if anybody came from another country, it just looks preposterous. And like I said, anybody who is really afraid after January 6th, I really think, I don't know what I can say for them. Their judgment is just very clouded.
Well, it certainly is a bad look for us, and eyes all over the world are on it. It looks like we're in some communist controlled.
Well, that and together with this cancel culture, it's kind of a communist sort of culture, isn't it? And when you have people taken down from the internet, you have little goofy things like Dr. Seuss books being banned. I mean, it's like we woke up and it's whatever 1920 in the Soviet Union or 19. It's just ridiculous. And I wish the Republicans would be louder about that. because it's just an entirely different sort of world. I mean, like I said, I'm going to confirm it. If what I was told this morning about classes that our military has to take, unbelievable. The increasing of affirmative action or racial identity that's going on under President Biden's executive order, and the fencing around the Capitol. By the way, under normal circumstances, one of the things I felt was nice about the Capitol is eccentric people could sit there at the base of the stairs when I left the Capitol every day and pamphlet us or talk to us. Usually they were kind of left-wing, very left-wing extreme people. But I thought it was kind of nice here in America. We were so open that every day if the congressman decided to go out and walk down the front steps, just any eccentric oddball could, tell us get rid of the speaker or, talk about global warming or whatever they wanted to talk about. And they could approach their congressman that way. Now we have fencing that really extends blocks outside of the Capitol. And it's, I think, apparently the type of government that people like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want. Because no normal person really thinks there's a threat going on there.
Well, if someone were in a hole for a year and a half or so, and they would have came out of it and looked to see what was going on, they would be questioning where they were, I would think.
It's an entirely different world. Masks, they're very much more strict in Washington about masks walking around outdoors, which you've read the odds of getting it walking around outdoors, but it's a really different world in Washington, a different world even than in Wisconsin. It's certainly a different world than in Oshkosh, much less Amro. And I think I still have a hard time believing that many people voted for this type of world or knew the type of world they were going to wind up getting. By the way, on elections, I should address that as well. I am involved with a group that is looking into the indefinitely confined statutes here in Wisconsin. I believe they were abused. It takes a while to do research on this, but hopefully the results of this research are going to be out in another couple of months, and we will have the numbers to show that program was very abused.
Right. Well, people want integrity in their voting process. We all do, and and you think on whether side of the aisle you're on, everybody would want that.
Yeah, I will emphasize again that I believe many of the problems came from vote by mail. I've always disliked it. I realize it's necessary for people who really need it, but when you vote by mail, you don't know who is really filling it out. You don't know if they're being coached by somebody. And I'm sure that happens with vote by mail. Are you being coached by a roommate? Are you being coached by a boyfriend, girlfriend, or spouse? I like it when people vote in person, when the privacy of the ballot is protected. And this drive for vote by mail, the only motivation that I can see is people who don't want to protect the privacy of the ballot. Even Jimmy Carter years ago when he was on a commission was against vote by mail because he knew it's an invitation for cheating.
That's right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. One last, the House discontinued its business on Thursday out of fear of another insurrection, I guess. What was the intelligence behind that? I mean, what did the House leadership know that nobody else knew?
It was a surprise to us, to be honest. It meant that we had to vote on bills very quickly. And I can't believe they had any hard intelligence. Like I said, I think they enjoy living in kind of a East Germany. They enjoy living, or they enjoy going to work in a building surrounded by a fence. It makes them feel better, and or they just are. I'm sure you can find anything on the internet, but how in the world you would get people to come to the Capitol. I mean, even on the 6th, you had probably hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of people there. You would kind of know what people were showing up. And Washington is so empty anyway right now because of the COVID. I mean, even before the 6th, the average person was not walking around the Capitol like you're familiar with in the past. So it's just, I think, quite frankly, embarrassing. And I wish we had a better press so they could talk to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and say, do you really believe this? Do you really believe we're going to be under attack on Thursday? But they run the show. People voted for them. And this is the type of world we have. And I continue to be very scared for the country, not only because of what Congress is doing, not only because of what President Biden is doing, but I think a lot of this is pretty predictable. And part of it is the Republicans didn't get out what was going to happen. Part of it is I think President Trump should have brought up other issues. I think he focused too much on the economy. But apparently part of it is a lot of the American public, this doesn't bother them. Or doesn't bother them the degree to which it should, which is really scary. I think we really have to do a better job of educating the children. By the way, what do we got here? We got 7 more minutes. I'm going to talk about something. Can I talk again? Give me a couple minutes.
Oh yeah.
And something that I'd like to publicize a little. There's something called critical race theory, and there are people who apparently are using our schools to tell their children that America is not that good of a country. And the major way they're doing that is they're telling people America is a very racist country. A little while ago, I was contacted by a teacher in Sheboygan South High School. And he had a class, not a class, a club or something devoted to looking into racism. And it was like, I don't know, 25 or 30 kids were on a Zoom similar to this. They were going to play this interview with me back, I was told, for everybody at Sheboygan South High School, which is a pretty sizable high school, by the way. And they had 4 questions for me that the principal wanted asked. One of them I remember in particular, the question was, about 4% of the kids in Sheboygan South High School are African American. 20% of the kids last year arrested were African American. What was I going to do about police brutality and racism within the police department to combat this? And I'm sure that's what all the kids apparently are being taught in Sheboygan High School. We have racist police who don't like Black people. There were several Black kids on the Zoom. I wonder what they thought about it. Obviously, Sheboygan South High School is paying one of its employees to teach the young people that America is a racist country, that police are racist, and that if people are arrested, at least if Black people are arrested, it's because of racism. I don't know how much longer our country can survive if that is what kids are getting. I was at a meeting last night in Marquette County, and people at that meeting talked about what their grandchildren were hearing in school. They mentioned Portage High School as one of the, or Portage grade schools as a similar sort of thing going on, in which our children are being taught how racist America is. I think you guys might want to look into the Oshkosh high schools and see whether any of this nonsense is going on there, because our country will not survive if our young people think we live in a horrible country. I think some of our older people who have a little more perspective know that people are coming here from all around the world, and you don't run into racist people in Oshkosh, but you do run into people who came here from all sorts of different backgrounds who are succeeding. However, our elementary school children do not have a point of reference and are naturally going to believe what their teachers tell them. So I don't know if it's in Oshkosh. It's certainly in Sheboygan. I have a friend who says it's all over Illinois. If what the person told me last night is true, it's in Portage. And I would look out. I don't know how, if you're a school board member or a school superintendent, you hire somebody to tear down America. And you look at the other countries, and there are ethnic conflicts among groups that we would have a hard time distinguishing between. here in America, people from all around the globe, all sorts of religions, living the American dream, and we're paying people in our school system to tear down America and teach the children how racist America is. I really think that last topic is more important than anything else. I'll try to get our education committee to hold a hearing. I don't think I will, but I'll try to use my platform to do something about it. What goes on in schools is largely a local concern thing, but I'll do what I can insofar as I find this sort of nonsense going on in other school districts, which it is, to publicize it. And hopefully if our school superintendents or school board members are not asleep at the switch, they will do something about it. And if there are any parents or grandparents out there who find this sort of thing going on in the schools, let us know.
That's excellent point. Couldn't agree with you more. You see it. My daughter goes to Madison, and some of the stories she tells me of what is discussed in classrooms, whether now virtual classrooms these days, is very, very, very concerning. So
it's the end of the country if we don't nip this in the bed, nip this in the bud. It's the end of the country, and right.
We are one people, and we need to act that way. So,
well, right. Not to mention, young people have to know America is something worth fighting for keeping, and we're educating even our military that what a horrible country it is, and I, if you want to Google something, can't remember exactly what website it's on, but the Buffalo schools. There was a great article recently out there in the Buffalo school district. What's going on there, which is a sizable city district. There, right away from elementary school on, kids are taught how racist America is, how bad it is. Real trouble. So.
Well, it doesn't look like the country we knew growing up. So
no, the kids are taught to hate it.
Right. It's a shame. Well, on that note, we're at our hour limit. So Congressman Grothman, we really appreciate it. A lot of people don't recognize and know you're the hardest working congressman in the United States.
Well, I hope I am.
You are. I see you all over the place. It could be on the weekend. It could be, anywhere. You're working hard for us. You support our agendas and support the business community, and we really appreciate the work you've been doing for us in Washington. And we were happy you were reelected and brought back to represent us. So we truly appreciate that. So on that note, we thank you for joining us, and we will hope to see you very soon.
Here we have an article. Eric Swalwell, California crazy congressman suing President Trump for emotional distress. There's a guy who probably didn't want to be in Washington today. He's under emotional distress. He needs to be compensated because being a congressman is such an emotional thing for Eric Swalwell.
Yeah, he has other issues.
He's got other issues, right? Exactly. It'd be cheaper to get him some mental help rather than build that wall or build the fence. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Take care.